Hello, everybody. Welcome.
Welcome to the forefront of change in sustainable forestry. We invite you to participate in the global consultation on FSC requirements, aligning with the EU regulation on deforestation-free products. This consultation features 3 sets of requirements, each crucial for the evolution of the FSC standard. Introducing the voluntary FSC Regulatory Module, designed to enhance forest management, chain of custody, and controlled wood practices. It also outlines accreditation requirements for certification bodies, aligning FSC standards with EUDR compliance. Presenting FSC advice notes, proposing system-wide changes. These changes not only align with EUDR, but strengthen our general certification requirements, making it deforestation-free and addressing supply chain mixing risks. Explore the expanded scope of FSC Risk Assessments. No longer limited to controlled wood, these assessments now apply to all certificate holders, demonstrating robust risk assessment and mitigation measures for stronger systems and EUDR compliance. How does this affect you? Even if you're not trading with the EU, understanding these system-wide shifts and risk assessments is essential. This consultation is open to all stakeholders, and your input is vital to maintaining FSC as a leader in sustainable forestry. Whether in English, Spanish, or French, we would love to hear your thoughts. Visit the FSC EUDR webpage for more information. Together against deforestation.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Yannicka Murphy, and I am the Policy Outreach Manager for the Performance and Standards Unit at FSC International. If anybody just joined us, we just opened with the introductory consultation video, for which you will find the link in the chat. Today, we are offering simultaneous interpretation of this webinar into English, or it is English, into Spanish and French. To access the interpretation, please go into your control panel and select the interpretation icon, which you can see on the screen here, and select the language for which you would like to listen this presentation in. Today, we have a question and answer session. To access and to place your questions, please utilize the Q&A feature, which is within our Zoom platform. We ask that you also please make your name anonymous so that we can protect your data. You can note that the chat function has been disabled for this webinar, but we encourage you to place any questions and to like a question for which you would also like to hear the answer so that we can prioritize questions based on those for the most interest to the most participants. This webinar covers an array of topics to reflect the current consultations, of which we have 3. I will start with a brief background to FSC's alignment with EUDR, an overview of what's being consulted, and then we will dive into the draft requirements currently under consultation and a little bit about how these requirements were developed. As mentioned, we have a Q&A session. This will take part at the end of the presentation, which should take no more than 45 minutes. I have some colleagues on the call with me who have been responsible for developing these requirements, and based on the provided questions, they will answer accordingly. This presentation part is currently being recorded and will be made available on the process page. You can actually already access the slides on the process page, for which we will put a link into the chat. And yeah. So what is the EUDR? The EUDR stands for EU Regulation on Deforestation-Free Products. It is a landmark EU law to minimize the EU's contribution to deforestation and degradation. FSC has been engaging with EU lawmakers throughout the development of this regulation. We encourage you to review the recording from our January 18th presentation to learn more about this engagement. And what requirements are included in the EUDR? Amongst them, the main requirements are that products are to be deforestation-free and produced in accordance with relevant legislation, which includes, for example, the protection of rights and principles of free, prior, and informed consent. This is strongly aligned already with FSC. While FSC goes beyond EUDR in terms of social and legal requirements, nonetheless, we have found that there are differences in the requirements of EUDR and existing FSC requirements. Predominantly, these differences include more information gathering, such as traceability and geolocation information, and more requirements for due diligence, as well as some terminology and related definitions are different. And what is due diligence in EUDR? It is essentially the collecting of information, assessing risk, and mitigating risk where needed. Information collection includes data such as geolocation on all plots of land, date time at range of harvesting, buyers, suppliers, country of production, common and scientific names, and quantities. This information is then assessed for any related risks. EU will be classifying certain countries as low risk, and for those, only a simplified due diligence would be required. I will discuss later in the presentation what the simplified due diligence entails. Of course, where non-negligible risk is found, it must then be mitigated. I will now actually bring in Joanna Nowakowska, our System Performance Director, to give a little bit more background into what FSC has been doing.
Thank you so much, Janica, and welcome everyone. I would like to start with stressing that since its inception, EUDR has been really important for FSC because it strongly aligns with our vision and mission to preserve forests. In fact, FSC had been developing our policy to address conversion in parallel with the EUDR, introducing stricter anti-deforestation and anti-degradation requirements across the whole FSC system. And therefore, FSC would like to support EUDR implementation by offering standardized and credible solutions for operators, traders, and their supply chains. Although, as Janica said, FSC is already significantly aligned with the EUDR, there are still some differences that we need to address. And at the same time, we need to make sure that our system is still accessible for those who do not need to comply with the regulation. And from that perspective, we have been facing rather challenging and opposite expectations. Those stakeholders associated with EU market were asking us to fully align with the EUDR and to do so as soon as possible. At the same time, those who do not need to comply with the regulations were encouraging us to not make too many changes because they didn't want to face changes that are not relevant for them. Our way to enable FSC for both those group of stakeholders was to introduce a voluntarily add-on standard applicable based on and at the top of our usual requirements. And we have called the standard Regulatory Module, and it is our key normative offering. However, the strong links that exist between EUDR and our policy to address conversion, as well as complexity of supply chains, in which only some suppliers would choose to use the regulatory module while others not, required us to also introduce certain system-wide changes that would apply for everybody. These changes were needed to preserve system integrity and also as a foundation and conditions for credibility of the voluntarily add-on standard. The most prominent system-wide changes relate to risk assessments. So far, we have required the use of risk assessments in the context of our mass balance system, and you can associate them with controlled wood or FSC mixed products. However, with EUDR now requiring risk assessments from all operators, we wanted to make sure that our risk assessment also served the regulation. And first and foremost, that there is only one uniform, credible, and consistent risk assessment framework that is being used across the whole FSC system, whether you are applying the regulatory module or not. Then the regulatory module is essentially copy and paste of key EUDR requirements at the top of FSC offering. And one of the key requirements from EUDR to mention are naturally traceability and geolocation. And for such requirements, we definitely need strong technology solutions, which are also part of our solution, but not in the focus of this webinar. So in this webinar series, we are diving deep into normative solutions, our standards, presenting you details on those three mentioned alignment areas. So the system-wide changes, plus specifically more information about risk assessments, as well as the regulatory module as an add-on standard. And with this, I will hand over back to you, Janika. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's start from these foundational changes that Joanna just mentioned, who are necessary for introducing FSC's core policy changes and safeguarding FSC's integrity when implementing other EUDR-specific changes. As a quick background, EUDR and FSC are aligned in trying to halt deforestation. And is FSC technically currently deforestation free? Not yet, but with the advice notes and consultation, we would be. So these advice notes are about closing the differences with FSC and EUDR, but also aligning with the intention of our policy to address conversion, which implied changes to the principles and criteria supported by FSC members in 2022. In addition, there are some other changes that are now fast-tracked. But first, what am I even talking about with advice notes? This is a part of our broader normative framework. For those that might not be super familiar with how our set of requirements, also known as the normative framework, works, it is comprised of a set of different types of normative requirements represented on this slide. We have policies, standards, and procedures for the most part. To support the implementation of these types of documents, we have advice notes and compilations of advice notes called directives, and then we have interpretations. So when referring to these system-wide changes in this consultation, this is in the form of advice notes, which are amendments of selected requirements that is either issued separately or may be added as an annex to the relevant set of requirements. As you might have already seen in the consultation, there are 4 advice notes for public consultation. We have an advice note on deforestation-free products from FSC certified management units. We are aligning with the intention of the policy to address conversion by ensuring that all forest products sourced from FSC certified management units are deforestation-free. With this advice note, while the exceptional cases outlined in the policy to address conversion are still allowed, these cannot enter into the supply chain any longer. In this advice note, clarifications are provided in the existing Advice Note 20.007.02 to show that degradation of primary forests is prohibited by our existing principles and criteria, and aligns the definition of primary forest with FAO's definition. We needed to align terminology from specified and low risk to negligible and non-negligible risk across the FSC system, which is included in this Advice Note 40.005.27. In addition, which risk assessments are applicable is outlined in the advice note. Since the regulatory module includes the regulatory claim, which we will review later, we needed to include an advice note to outline for non-users of the regulatory module how to control this claim. Controlling this claim may also be requested by clients, as it would benefit due diligence systems for the risk of mixing, as it does lower the risk. So, in the consultation, based on these added and revised advice notes, we're looking for our stakeholders to let us know their answers to questions such as, if you are a certificate holder, how significant is the impact of prohibition of selling products originated from minimal conversion as FSC certified for your operations? Are the advice notes clear? And what is the impact on the supply of FSC controlled wood in your estimation? Now I wanted to provide a little overview of this FSC regulatory module. To support certificate holders' EUDR compliance, we have developed a voluntary add-on standard called the FSC Regulatory Module, the other of the 3 parts currently open for consultation. The FSC Regulatory Module, with the code FSC STD 01004, is an extension to existing certification standards. It was developed to support compliance with EUDR, and as such incorporates EUDR-specific criteria, definitions, documentation, and verification processes. This standard is a module that is completely voluntary. Should you use the module, note that it cannot be used as a guarantee for compliance with EUDR. Our FSC system only verifies conformity with our normative framework. Our goal was to create an easy-to-use, out-of-the-box modular offering. It is voluntary as to not disrupt our global certification system, but rather address the needs of those affected by EUDR. It can only be used on top of existing certification requirements of either forest management, controlled wood, project certification, or chain of custody, all in one single standard. It is also for users such as certification bodies, as it includes accreditation requirements. Since it is just one standard, we have allocated different parts of the standard for different users. Part 1 includes add-on requirements for forest management, including groups and controlled forest management. Part 2 is for chain of custody, project certification, and controlled wood sourcing certification. Part 3 includes add-on trademark requirements, and last but not least, the requirements need to be audited, so there are accreditation requirements. The beginning of the regulatory module includes a comprehensive overview of comparisons between FSC terms and EUDR terms. At times, definitions aren't fully comparable, so the definition section has interpretations included where further clarification is needed. So, for example, there are 2 interpretations to clarify exactly how our existing certification covers the prevention of deforestation as defined by EUDR. FSC has 5 types of certification, where all are referred to as the organization, whereas EUDR classifies users as small, medium enterprises, SMEs, or non-small medium enterprises, and as traders and operators. Not all requirements apply to all types of EUDR classified users, so we've included a guidance with icons for easy reference for each clause, as the module includes tailored requirements depending on the EUDR classified users, based on size and position in the supply chain. All right, so for forest management certification, what more is needed? The module includes additional requirements for forest management, mainly around conducting due diligence. This includes information collection, risk assessment, and risk mitigation. When you need to conduct a risk assessment, FSC risk assessments must be used as a starting point. We are also producing a simplified risk assessment template specifically for forest managers to use, where if the FSC risk assessment isn't available, or to help demonstrate how forest management certification is indeed an effective risk mitigation measure to achieve negligible risks where any non-negligible risks have been identified in the FSC risk assessment. And for controlled forest management, the same requirements as for, quote, regular, unquote, forest management certification apply. But note that the regulatory module can only be used with version 3 of controlled forest management, which is the version published on January 1st of this year. In the consultation, based on these proposed additional requirements, we are looking for input on questions such as, do you agree that forest management certification can be considered an effective mitigation measure? How useful would a risk assessment template provided by FSC be? Anything that we are missing? Now, looking into additional requirements for chain of custody users. We discussed earlier that there are some different requirements for SME or non-SME traders and operators, which is most pertinent in this part. So be sure to check what applies to you, and don't forget that a guidance and key exists in the standard to know which requirements apply. Not all the requirements we present here in a simplified way should even be read as applicable to all. Even in the module, we have some clauses saying, where applicable, as some rules only apply to companies in a specific situation. The main addition to chain of custody requirements, similar to forest management, is a much more comprehensive due diligence system. Note that for conducting risk assessments, you can use FSC risk assessments, which will be discussed next in this presentation. So why conduct due diligence? It is about demonstrating that products are deforestation-free, have been produced in accordance with the relevant legislation of the country of production, and covered by a due diligence statement. Should there be evidence that any given material is not conforming with this, the material would be a non-conforming product. Sometimes only a simplified due diligence is needed. This is available for management units located in countries or areas classified as low risk according to EUDR's three-tier system, and only negligible risk from the FSC risk assessment is found. Should that be the case, organizations would not need to conduct the risk assessment and risk mitigation, assuming there's no risk of mixing and there's no additional information on substantiated concerns. In this module, we are introducing a new regulatory claim. The regulatory claim may come from the forest management level or from the first chain of custody certificate holder applying the module. This is a claim made on sales and delivery documents used in combination with the FSC claim, excluding FSC recycled, for products based on inputs exclusively of material which has been assessed to be in conformity with the requirements of the FSC Regulatory Module. Products exclusively made of input materials from a fully verified supply chain can add a plus symbol to the regulatory claim. For example, Regulatory Plus or REG Plus. This is a new term specifically for when every certificate holder has applied the regulatory module and established a product group for the purpose of controlling this Regulatory Plus claim. For conformity with the regulatory module, you must not only take care of complaints, but also any information on substantiated concerns. Should any non-conforming products be detected, you must inform the competent authorities. In addition, ensure that your management system can prove conformity with the FSC regulatory module. The regulatory module does not outline any additional requirements for controlled wood sourcing beyond requirements presented in the chain of custody part, as controlled wood is already a risk-based system based on EUTR, EUDR's predecessor. And our controlled wood standard 40005 does not stand alone. And so by default, changes required by chain of custody certification requirements would already need to be implemented. For project certification, most additional requirements are similar to the earlier chain of custody additional requirements, including addressing any substantiated concerns, informing competent authorities about any non-conforming products, and conducting due diligence. The main change in the additional requirements are that those applying the regulatory module to their project certification cannot use non-certified or non-controlled components within their project. In the consultation, based on these proposed additional requirements, we are looking for stakeholder input around questions such as, to what extent do you agree with introducing a fully verified supply chain? Do you think there is additional effort to conform with the standard beyond what was already foreseen within EUDR? With the additional reporting requirements with EUDR, FSC is considering having a public summary of corrective action requests for chain of custody certificate holders. What do you think? Organizations may promote FSC certified products in the scope of the FSC regulatory module with the FSC trademarks. You can see on the screen here an example of such a promotion. We have a sample FSC certified juice packaging in the scope of the regulatory module. The organization has a fully verified supply chain, as discussed, meaning that it has a supply chain where every certificate holder has applied the FSC regulatory module and established a product group for the purpose of controlling the relevant claim. In this case, the organization may use the statement on the screen to advertise their cardboard juice packaging. There's a trademark section in the regulatory module containing examples of such promotional statements. Tell us what you think about them in the ongoing public consultation. With the additional requirements, there is the need for certification bodies to be able to audit conformity. As such, the module outlines accreditation requirements. All accredited certification bodies are expected to offer verification against this module, and this means that it forms a mandatory part of the accreditation requirements. These requirements are additional to the 3 existing accreditation standards, namely 20001, 20007, and 20011. focus of the additional requirements is on evaluating the design and functioning of the due diligence system, in particular for chain of custody certificate holders where this is a new component. Additional requirements for forest management and chain of custody also cover reporting requirements. General accreditation requirements include that certificate holders need to extend their scope of certification to include the regulatory module. Certification bodies will need to conduct a desk-based audit of certificate holders before the scope is extended. As a general principle, nonconformities are considered separate from other certification requirements. Examples of major nonconformities are provided in the chain of custody evaluation section. I've frequently been referencing due diligence a lot up until now, and a key part of this are our risk assessments, which is the third part currently under consultation. Our risk assessments are under the Risk Assessment Framework, an existing revision process from the Controlled Wood Risk Assessment Framework revision, which was FSC Pro 60002A and is now FSC Pro 60006B. It outlines risk assessment and mitigation practices that can be key tools for applying EUDR and FSC Regulatory Module requirements. The code change just mentioned is based on our revision of how FSC is developing country requirements. Risk assessment content requirements are now part of the overarching country requirements process requirements. This extensive process has resulted in the following key changes. Risk assessments now have an expanded applicability, as now the produced risk assessments will be aligned with EUDR requirements and can be used for forest management and chain of custody users as well. Our existing risk assessments are in PDF format and quite long, and now they will be a data set in Excel so that they can be transferred to technology platforms to complement relevant tools such as GIS tools and showing geopolitical scales. The sources will soon include more objective and standardized sources with an expansive source list which have been assessed for relevance and reliability. Regarding assessments, risk indicators are now aligned across various sustainability schemes, with a standardized template with a clear structure for assessing each type of risk per indicator at the same geopolitical spatial scale. Each country is automatically at a non-negligible risk designation for conversion, which aligns with the intention of FSC's policy to address conversion and EUDR by ensuring the developers of risk assessments come up with effective mitigation measures for conversion that can be applicable under the area of assessment. Forest degradation is also assessed, and we are currently working on GIS solutions to support this even further. To align with EUDR and have the same terminology across the FSC system and avoid unnecessary confusion, we're now adopting negligible and non-negligible risk designation. Risk designations also now have objective and clear criteria. A complete review is still required every 5 years, but now an annual review is also needed. This will be an expedited process with a targeted consultation and focused on risk designation, legislation, and update of mitigation measures to ensure any changes throughout the year are accurately captured. Mitigation measures are now specified for when there is non-negligible risk and exist per each type of risk. Through the 60006B Risk Assessment Framework Procedure, risk assessments will be developed to provide strong requirements to uphold social and environmental values, ensuring our three chambers of FSC are accurately reflected. The risk assessments outline 76 indicators, including land use and management, taxes and fees, corruption and document and data falsification, human and labor rights, high conservation values, conversion and forest degradation, genetically modified organisms, GMOs, environmental protection, health and safety, third parties' rights, trade and transport, and due diligence and due care. Our risk assessment template outlines key requirements for assessing risk, where you essentially start by collecting information based on each indicator, considering the scale of assessment, type of risk, and applicable legislation relevant to the area under assessment. Assess this information and designate risk as either negligible or non-negligible. Where non-negligible risk is identified, provide mitigation measures and verifiers per indicator. I mentioned briefly about cross-scheme risk assessments. This is through the Risk Information Alliance. What this alliance is developing is a single set of requirements that is applicable for different supply and production streams. It sets out habitat and species protection and promotes FSC values throughout these different supply streams, such as HCV protection and excluding GMOs. The revision of Procedure 60006B includes new streamlining through this Risk Information Alliance, as now risk assessments can be developed and decision-making processes streamlined through the Alliance. By participating in this alliance, we are making global waves, continuing to situate FSC as leaders in the field of risk assessments and mitigation beyond just forestry. Regarding the development of risk assessments, while we are incorporating new streamlined processes just mentioned, this does not mean that FSC is straying from our existing best practices for risk assessment development. There is still the provision for the development of risk assessments through chamber balanced working groups. As EUDR is just around the corner, we are fast-tracking the development of EUDR-aligned risk assessments. We have identified 20 priority countries where risk assessments will be developed by March of 2025. The rest will continue to be developed afterwards. Note, of course, that extended company risk assessments are still available where an FSC risk assessment does not yet exist. We have selected the fast-track countries which are outlined in this slide here. Note that the prioritization was done through a criteria based on things like forest management certified area, number of chain of custody certificates, relevance of import and export to Europe. We've also recently opened a request for proposals to support the development of these risk assessments. The link will be placed in the chat to learn more. In the consultation for the risk management framework, based on these proposed additional requirements, we're looking for stakeholders to let us know answers to questions such as, do you agree with the revised indicators? What do you think about the risk assessment template? Do you agree that the risk assessment framework is now aligned with FSC's policy to address conversion? Should forest degradation be assessed in line with the EUDR? So just to briefly review how these requirements were developed. Our starting point was the EU regulation. The EU Deforestation-Free Products Regulation will replace the EU Timber Regulation, EUTR. EUTR is repealed with effect from 30th of December 2024. However, EUTR will still be applicable until the 31st of December in 2027 to timber and timber products that were produced before 29th of June 2023 and placed on the market from 30th of December 2024. EUTR continues to apply for 3 years to wood products where trees were harvested before the EUDR came into force, and the wood product is placed on EU market on or after the EUDR becomes applicable to businesses. FSC understands that we still need a solution pretty immediately to support our stakeholders. So we are here to review these proposed solutions with quick timelines to help you with the upcoming regulatory changes. We started with a comprehensive gap analysis to identify alignment and differences between FSC and EUDR. From the differences, a set of proposed requirements were compiled and presented to the FSC International Board of Directors, who approved the direction for the process and requirements development. Since December of 2023, these requirements have been developed. Under the procedure 01001, the development of FSC requirements, this process qualified as an accelerated process, but we did include major elements such as a public consultation, so it is now a hybrid process. The requirements were developed by a technical working group comprising of FSC staff and an ASI representative. We have a public consultation now for 30 days, and the approval body for the FSC Regulatory Module and system-wide changes is the FSC International Board of Directors. So let's talk about this consultation really quickly and the publication of the new requirements. Let's review. We have the new procedure 60006B Risk Assessment Framework, and our 4 advice notes, which are our system-wide changes and the FSC Regulatory Module. These are cross-cutting topics and requirements, which is why we have them all available simultaneously for consultation. Today, we covered all 3 topics on a general level. Tomorrow, for those interested, there will be 2 more webinars solely dedicated to the risk assessment framework. And now here we are, presenting the requirements for our stakeholders in a consultation ending on March 1st. After the consultation ends on March 1st, input from the consultation will be assessed and incorporated, and the requirements will go for FSC Board of Directors approval. Upon approval, requirements will be published on July 1st of this year and become immediately effective for those applying the regulatory module. Since not all FSC users are, of course, affected by EUDR, advice notes for non-regulatory module users will only become effective on October 1st, with an 18-month transition period ending in April of 2026. I know there was a lot in this presentation, but note that we are also here to help. To better understand the requirements for consultation, we've published supplemental documents and material. This includes shareable versions of the consultation itself, an FAQ specifically on the requirements in consultation, our draft normative documents, and majority of the material is available in both French and Spanish. We have an introductory video to help understand why it is all simultaneous, and there is an info kit to support the regulatory module. Also, a quick reminder that this presentation is recorded and available on the process page with the documents or the decks. We also have a user journey available at fsc-eudr-journey.org. Here you can click through based on user type, such as forest management and chain of custody, as well as SME, non-SME, trader, and operator, to understand what exactly are the proposed requirements in consultation based on your user type. We encourage you to use translators through your browser to have a language available for you. We have meticulously developed these requirements in consultation to support our certificate holders in demonstrating compliance with the EUDR. This does not mean we are a green lane, and we cannot guarantee compliance, but we have also done the groundwork for you. Also, note through our existing third-party verification, you have an additional safeguard through our assurance systems. We are currently working on complementary technology tools to seamlessly complement our normative requirements. Our supporting documentation and tools for these proposed requirements are to provide accessible and user-friendly ways for you and your supply chain's journey to compliance. FSC is a proven leader in the development of risk assessments and exercising due diligence, and we have over 25 years of experience with smallholders, communities, and family forests to support their certification journeys and ultimately additional EUDR compliance support. While I did just mention technology tools, this is currently not actually a part of the existing public consultation. Note that more information on tools such as GIS, blockchain, due diligence statements, and the risk assessment library will be announced a little bit later. However, there is a new dedicated webpage to learn more about the development of FSC blockchain at fsc.org/blockchain. You can also stay tuned through signing up for our newsletter. In the meantime, we ask that you refrain from asking questions about these tools now during this webinar so that we can focus on the normative requirements. And speaking of, we will quickly get into the Q&A. But before that, we would ask that you please take a moment to take out your phone and scan this QR code or use the link provided in chat to be sure to give feedback on this webinar and how the consultation is going with a really brief survey, no more than 5 minutes. And so I would like to hand over to Saya Hotti, who is the process lead and will take us through the question and answer portion of this presentation.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Janika, for this informative presentation. My name is Saya Hotti, and I'm Program Manager for Regulatory Framework here at FSC International, and I will take you through the question and answers session part of this webinar today. We also have here experts from several different teams that have actually developed the requirements in consultation at the moment. For example, we have Joanna Novakovska, you already heard from a little bit, our System Performance Director. We have Stefan Salvador, our Policy Operation Director. We have Dorothee Jung from Accreditation Team, Cesar Gonçalves and Shiv Panse from Chain of Custody Team. Maria Melero from Forest Management Team, Nicolas Rojas and Urit K from Risk Assessment Team. We have also Madalena Mirea from our Trademark Team. And then, of course, my counterpart, Parmida Daniali, who will help sorting through the questions that I hope are already now gathering in the question and answers part. Just a reminder, you can find this Q&A part on the lower bar of your Zoom screen, and you can submit your questions through there. We hope that you submit them anonymously, as mentioned before. And also remember to vote for questions. So if you see that someone else has already asked your question, or you see that they have asked a question that is of interest to you as well, just give a thumbs up and then it will move higher up on the list. You can change the view on this question and answers part for yourself from the upper right. Up by there it says most recent, and from the arrow next to it you can also change it into a most up votes if you would like to see which questions are most likely to come up next according to this listing. We are now in this doing this series of webinars last week and this week. And when we are finished with the webinars, we will update our frequently asked questions about regulatory module as well as risk assessments, and we'll be then publishing these to you. So your questions today will also help others with their questions, hopefully in the future. But I hope this is the processes are clear now. We have a good half an hour to go through the questions with the team. And let's see, Parmida, earlier on we had a couple of questions around risk assessments on top. Is this still the case?
Yes, Saya. Hello, everyone. So the first question with the highest vote is about that exactly. When will country-level risk classification be available?
Thanks. And I think, Nico, you can help us with this. And there's a follow-up question also, like where to find this list. And maybe you can just mention that as well, please.
Thank you very much, Saya and Parmida, and hi, everybody. So, well, yes, I imagine that the question is referring to the updated risk designations of the risk assessments that will be revised. So this will only happen, as we explained, as Yannick explained, by March 2025. We are planning to already publish the first 20 revised risk assessments. So by that moment, we will be having the results of the risk designations per indicators for those 20 countries. Nevertheless,